Welcome back. All right, news of the day video for all you fine people on your Friday, February the 24th. Only 4 more days in February, and then we're into March. And of course, March the 3rd is the trade deadline. So, as chilly as things are in Canada right now, we're headed towards spring, and we are headed towards the deadline. Now, the first thing making news today is Eric Cernak will have a hearing with player safety over elbowing on Kyle Okposo in last night's game against Buffalo. So, we'll see how long he's out, because if it's a hearing, it's almost always a suspension, right? There are those rare exceptions, but it's almost always a suspension if there's an actual hearing. If there's a fine, they usually just tell us that there's a fine. So it looks like Chernak's going to be out. We'll see for how long. I would think a game, maybe two. We'll see. You know, if they decide that he's got a history, then maybe it ends up being more, but I think a game, maybe two. So we'll see. So the New York Rangers making a lot of news right now, and there's this swarm of possibilities of what could happen. So Vince Mercogliano is reporting that the Rangers have made a big push over the last 24 to 48 hours with Kane. Once Kane came out and stated that he was disappointed that they made the Tarasenko move, the Rangers didn't think Tarasenko and Kane was a possibility. But now that Kane's made it clear he'd like to go to the Rangers. There are reports about whether or not that's the only team he's willing to go to. I honestly think that if Kane feels like he has a chance, it's not like if GM Davidson came to him and said, "Hey, do you want to go to Tampa?" He'd go, "No, why would I want to go to Tampa for?" I mean, I would imagine that the Rangers, he'd love to be reunited with Panarin and all of that. So, that being said, the Rangers holding out Kravtsov and Lecision currently. They're trying, and they didn't even have them at practice today. They are trying to get to where they can make the cap hit work. So they need a broker. So the 25%, Bill Guerin, your phone might be ringing over the next day or two if it's not already. And they need to stay under the cap. Obviously, with Kane, that $10.5 million cap hit that his contract brings is a problem. But they're trying to make this work. Now, the way this is being reported by Vince is that we're going to see this play out. It could be until the day of the trade deadline, because they want to maximize their space. They want to hold guys out, maximize the amount of space. You can accrue cap space. And again, this is why they have capologists on teams, because this is a complicated mathematical works too. Sure. Mathematical wonders and all of that stuff. Sometimes you just create a word and you go, hey, actually, that's kind of fun. So, yeah, he's basically saying it's going to take a while, but Chris Johnston, on the other hand, is reporting that his sources are telling him this situation with Patrick Kane will come to a head and a resolution within the next 24 hours or so. So, the Rangers are working to make this work, and apparently it could take almost a week for them. And the other Kane side of things is this could be resolved in 24 hours. Now, he hasn't waived his no movement clause yet, but he doesn't have to until they're going to make that move. So him not waiving the no movement clause doesn't mean a whole lot yet. And all that means is he has control. So if he's saying, I only want to go to the Rangers, then that's where he ends up. If he's willing to go to another team that's a contender, then for Chicago, you might have negotiations with the Rangers and then go to a Tampa or, yes, sure, Toronto. Why not? We'll go ahead and throw Toronto's name out there because people will and have, and I've seen it. But for a contending team that's inquiring about Kane, there's nothing wrong with Chicago talking to the Rangers and also talking to other teams and then reporting back to Patrick Kane. So we've seen before where, it's obvious this player's going to this team, and then at the last minute it will switch. Now what happens is then fans will attack the reporters as if see, you guys don't have sources, you guys are just making stuff up. When in reality, they do have sources. Those sources have accurate information at the time, and then things change, and things absolutely can. Until the trade actually takes place, the assumption can't be made. So I've seen the Photoshop of Kane and Panarin together wearing Ranger jerseys. That's out there all over the place. But if he doesn't become a Ranger, that's going to become a meme for how fans really shouldn't count their chickens before they've hatched. So we'll see what happens with this, but it's fascinating. It's a lot of fun to watch. And all of a sudden, Kane's really a popular target. I think the fact he's been playing much better lately, it's a matter of motivation with Kane. I don't think he's been that motivated this year, and I've talked about how His line mates, they're obviously his line mates right now are not the same kinds of line mates that he's had for 5, 10, 15 years in his career, right? So I understand his point total's coming down, but he's looked great over the last week and a half. I think he's motivated by the idea of, hey, I can actually compete for a Stanley Cup this year. I got to get my game going, and he's done quite well. So we'll see what happens there. But does it happen over the next 24 hours, or does it happen in a week? That's the question, and it depends on who you ask. So last night during the Pittsburgh-Edmonton game, and there were a lot of games on, so I did not hear the Fire Hextall chants, but they were loud enough that it's kind of made the rounds. And there's discussions of dysfunction going on in this organization. Maybe a split between Coach Mike Sullivan and Ron Hextall on how things are being done. Now, when those show up, very often the coach ends up being out of a job. So at the end of this season, if Pittsburgh finishes outside the playoffs, Mike Sullivan would probably be the one that ended up going of the two, only because that's usually how it works. A GM will get a chance to bring in their own coach. Hextall hasn't had to bring in a coach yet. So the one thing for today that's going on with Pittsburgh is Kasperi Kapanen is being waived. He's being put on waivers. And that was Hextall telling Sullivan, yeah, he's not going to be at practice. He's being waived. So Kapanen, it's interesting too, because when you're waiving a guy, you don't keep him out of practice. So that to me says it's more than just putting a guy on waivers just to wake guys up. So maybe Kapanen's on the move. I don't know. Maybe they waive him, and after he's cleared, then they trade him. But he has not played up to expectation. A lot of players haven't. Even my favorite guy on the Penguins, Teddy Bluger, has been largely invisible during some of the games he's played. Now, he was out for quite a while. I don't know if he's 100%. But it's been really clear this year that things are not working in Pittsburgh. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if my Bluger jersey becomes a vintage jersey soon enough if he ends up getting traded or ends up just leaving the team or whatever ends up happening. Because things in Pittsburgh are all of a sudden kind of dysfunctional. Even though they're still in the hunt for the playoffs, they're not that far below the playoff line, and they have games in hand on some of the other teams they're fighting for a playoff spot with. So for Hextall, he's going to be looking at, the schedule that remains and all that, and he's wanting to put the team in the playoffs. There are fans of Pittsburgh who are saying, hey, look what the Caps are doing. We should do the same thing because we're getting older. And so I think there's that disconnect. Hextall revamped the blue line in the offseason. I need to do a video on Pittsburgh anyways, and we need to look at it. And it'll be different than the Washington one because with Pittsburgh, there were a lot of trades that happened. And just moves that were made in the offseason, and we need to look at which ones worked and which ones didn't. Because the Fire Hextall means the fans have decided this isn't on Mike Sullivan, this is on the general manager, and so we can go through and take a look at that. Speaking of dysfunction, the St. Louis Blues. Craig Berube doesn't handle losing well. He is not a fan. And coming out of last night's game, he was kind of ticked. Now, Vancouver won that game rightfully. Vancouver was the better team through most of that game. And so I was fine with them coming back and winning it because, as I said in the recap last night, there was also a lot of anger in that game. It got kind of ugly. The interesting part is Craig Berube, after saying a lot of our best players are not doing the job, I guess they don't care about the team. I don't know. I'm not sure why. Now, this is an angry coach after a loss that was probably frustrating because you're up 2-0 and then you lose 3-2, right? And you're outplayed through most of the game. Now, Robert Thomas was asked about this, and he said, I know everyone in the room cares. It's frustrating to hear, and says he's doing the best he can. He's accepting accountability for things that aren't working. And I see this, and I think to myself, are both of... I mean, not Robert Thomas so much, but is Craig Berube not seeing that the loss of these players, so you lose O'Reilly, you lose Tarasenko, you lose Mikkola, guys on this team know what's going on. They know that there's a sell-off going on. At this time of year, there are always a lot of former players that come out and say, hey, guys get distracted at this time of year. It's tough to go into a locker room and know that guys are leaving. It is really tough to play for a team when you don't know who's going to be gone next. And these are things that have to be going on with the Blues right now. This was supposed to be a playoff team this year. They were supposed to be a good team this year, and it just hasn't worked. So it can be hard to be 100% dialed in for each game. So for Craig Berube, I'm kind of surprised that he, being a former player too, who's gone through a lot of trade deadlines, that he's not seeing that side of it, or at the very least, he's not saying that to the press. And so the Blues are kind of in some dysfunction right now. which happens when there's a lot of losing. I've said this, and I know there's been a lot of talk about various teams and the infighting. Once teams start losing, there are guys who do not handle it well, and Craig Berube does not handle the losing side of things well. Berube might be looking at it too from a perspective of, as we always say, coaches are hired to be fired, and that at the end of this year he wants to still have that job, and he'd like to see some more wins from St. Louis, keep themselves afloat, and at least stay in the hunt. Because to him, I don't think he's given up on the hunt yet. And if you show him the standings, he'll probably just throw them at you. I think with Berube, he's a very good coach. I do think Robert Thomas is still one of the best passers in the National Hockey League. And so I kind of feel bad because Thomas and Kyrou are now seen as the guys, but you need to have the right support around them, and right now that's not there. The Blues have traded that veteran support and guys like Tarasenko and O'Reilly, especially O'Reilly. Even if O'Reilly isn't playing particularly well, he's still the leader on that team. Well, now he's gone to Toronto, and the expectation is Thomas is probably going to be the next captain. So all of a sudden you're putting a lot of pressure on a guy who's just 23 years of age to lead a team. And so with St. Louis, we'll see if this is just a one-year thing where they're below the playoff line, or if this is a sign the team's going to do some kind of a retool. You're not going to need to rebuild. There's a lot of good young players on this team. Tonight we're going to see Anthony Duclair make his season debut for Florida. Long awaited. They had to get creative and waive Tierney and all that fun stuff in order to make sure they had the cap room to make it work. But Duclair making his debut tonight against the Sabres. That's going to be an interesting one because I was already thinking this game could have a bunch of goals. Yeah, add Anthony Duclair, a guy who can score at a 30-goal pace with Florida. That should just add to the offense, make it even more fun to watch. So Vancouver, you have Team Tank and you have, people that just want to see the team do well. Now, I'm on Team Tank, but there are some exceptions, and I've mentioned last night. Now, even with last night's victory, the Canucks are currently 27th overall. They have the sixth best lottery odds right now when it comes to landing a good draft pick. The lowest possible spot they can draft is 8th. If you're a Canucks fan, you're going, so we're drafting 8th. Right, yeah, we don't win lotteries, right? But the reality is, all kidding aside, they're probably going to draft, I'll say 7th. With the way things are going, I'll say they probably end up drafting 7th. It's a good deep draft. They'll be able to get a pretty good player at 7th. I would think they probably look for a blue liner. Although, as I always say, best player available is really important. And don't worry about if it's a scorer that isn't very, very big or very tall. You still need guys who are the best player available. Go ahead and pick them up. But I don't worry as much with each game. So last night when they won, I didn't get concerned. And again, they played really well. And one thing that's emerged this year with Vancouver, Pettersson's a superstar. His resurgence has been fantastic because he's healthy. He's healthy for the first time in a long time, and it shows on the ice. And with the exit of Horvat, it definitely seems like in Vancouver, as I said in last night's recap, JT Miller's playing better, and so's Pettersson. Pettersson's really taken on. I think he's shown he can play almost any role that the team wants for him. So, yeah, I'm not as concerned with Vancouver at this point, but, yeah, I want to see them play well. If they lose games, great, because the better draft position, the better, again, in a really deep draft, where at least the top 5 are guys that are going to be either pushing for NHL jobs quickly or project to be superstars. And Michkov's the one that probably doesn't end up in the NHL quickly, but does project to be a superstar in the National Hockey League. Cole Perfetti, when asked today, Coach Rick Bowness said it's a minimum of 8 weeks. It's an upper body injury. It is not related to the injury he had last season. And 8 weeks is not, it's not great, but it could be a lot worse. And 8 weeks, so that'd put him as coming back around playoff time, right? So for Perfetti, he was having a good season for the Winnipeg Jets. Really solid player with a lot of top 6 upside to him. So hopefully he comes back before the 8-week period is done. That'd be great, but say when you hear minimum of 8 weeks, it means it's probably going to end up being longer. But I'm an optimist. I like to say, you know what, maybe Perfetti comes back sooner than expected. But let me know your thoughts regarding any of these items on the board. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.